Hey, you over there. Yeah, I see you. You're thinking about starting your own podcast, aren't you? Well, if you haven't heard about Anchor by Spotify, it's the easiest way to make a podcast with everything you need all in one place. Let me explain because I have some experience here. Anchor has tools that allow you to record and edit your podcast right from your phone or computer. When hosting on Anchor, you can distribute your podcast on listening platforms like Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and more. It's everything you need to make a podcast in one place. And best of all, Anchor is totally free. Yeah, that's right. You heard me. Totally free to record, edit, and distribute your podcast. It doesn't get any better than that. So download the Anchor app or go to Anchor.fm to get started. Hey, coming up on this episode of Ayana Explains It All, I'll deep dive into the world of empathy. Do you have it? Do you need it? And like war, what is it good for? Now let's start the show. Hey everyone, it's Ayana Fakir here with episode 5 of Ayana Explains It All. And as I start every podcast, I'll start it with Bismillah. And a welcome. Welcome. If you're new here, I'm Ayana. I'm usually doing this live from, well, not live, recorded. I record in my dining room, and I've been working with different microphones and whatnot and trying to get some good sound going for the podcast. Try to make myself not seem like an amateur, even though I am severely green, as they say. Always forget to take out my retainer. Yeah, I wear a retainer. I don't have to, but the spaces in my teeth are so ridiculous that they try to come back. And so whenever I don't wear my retainer, like for 12 hours a day, I get nervous. So I just wear it all the time because I'm weird, because I don't want to have to wear braces ever again in my life. So today's episode, we're going to talk about empathy. Empathy is something that I've mentioned before in the narcissist topic, the discussion. I think that was episode 4. I talked about empathy and how narcissists lack empathy. They have no use for it. They dispense with it. They don't need to care about you. They don't need to relate to you. They don't need to offer you any sort of sorrow, feelings. No, they don't care. They don't care. And it's because they can't. A lot of them can't. Some of them just don't want to be bothered, but a lot of them can't do it. It's that thing in them that's missing they didn't get when they were a child that they're lacking. And so when you're in trouble, when you're hurt, when you're in pain, when you're trying to get somebody to understand what you're going through, if you go to a narcissist, they're going to look at you like you're crazy. Because why are you talking to me about this? I don't care about you. Did I give you some kind of indication that I care? Do I look like I have a kind face? And then they'll just turn it around back to themselves and they'll start talking about themselves. But when you have empathy, it means that you're able to put yourself in someone else's shoes. Walk a mile in my shoes, base many dudes. Every time I hear walk a mile in my shoes, it takes me back to that song for some reason. So that's empathy. Empathy is the ability to relate to someone. When somebody tells you a story, you go, I understand. You don't go, oh, that happened to me too. That's narcissism. You go, oh, I understand. I know why you would feel that way. I get why you would feel that way. I get it. I understand. And then if you want to help them, that's compassion. So we'll get into all of that later, but I just wanted to give you that quick and dirty primer and say that there are examples of empathy everywhere. Like we're seeing it now with the war in the UK, in the Ukraine. People who have been through war are relating to I think I read a stat that said 1.45 million people have fled the country. And there are people who are, I can relate, I'm going to donate. I have family there, I'm going to donate. I'm going to help them. I'm going to, help with housing. And because the people have fled to Poland and Hungary and Romania. And there's all this outpouring of support. But there are also examples of empathy being withheld. And again, I'll get to that later. So, but there are so many examples of empathy if you pay attention. And one of the stark examples for me, of course, relates back to the Golden Girls. I love the Golden Girls. Everyone knows this about me. If you follow me, huge Golden Girls fan since I was a kid. I have a little mini marathon every night. I watch a couple episodes. When I'm feeling, blue, Golden Girls, do a whole day marathon, and I laugh, and I just, kick it with these old broads, and I have a good time. There's an episode of the Golden Girls, I believe it is in season 1, where Rose brings a man home. She brings Al Beatty home with her. And they have a good time that night. They sleep together. And when she wakes up, he's dead. And she tries to pretend like, it didn't happen. Nothing happened. And then she tells the girls that she thinks, Sophia comes into the kitchen when they're all in the kitchen talking about the noise that they heard coming from Rose's room. Sophia comes into the kitchen and she said, "There's a man in your bed. I went in your room to put away the laundry and there's a man in your bed." And Rose said, "No, there isn't." And she said, "Yeah, there's a man in your bed and the man in your bed is dead." And so all of these hijinks ensue when they try to figure out who the man, where the man is from, who to inform of his death. And she goes, he's Al Beatty from Boca Raton. And so they he told her that his sister lived with him. And they look in the phone book. Oh, there's a Beatty in Boca Raton. And so Rose goes to his house. It turns out that the Beatty in Boca Raton is not his sister. It's his wife. Rose didn't know that Mr. Al Beatty had a missus. And when she informs Mrs. Beatty that her husband is dead, they have a heart-to-heart. She just came and told this woman who she didn't know was sleeping with her husband that he's dead, and she's in shock. The wife is in shock. And Rose is going on and on about this. And it turns out that the same thing happened to Rose with her husband. Her husband died while they were having sex, so the story goes. And so Rose is going on and on about, oh, this happened to me, and I do this with men, I kill men. And Mrs. Beatty looks at her and she goes, "Can you pull yourself together? You've just informed me that the man you were sleeping with, my husband, is dead. I'm going to need some comforting too." And Rose goes, oh, you're right. Oh, I'm so sorry. And comforts her. And when I was putting this podcast together, I was like, that's empathy. At first, it was self-centeredness. Rose was only thinking of herself. The character, Rose, in the show was kind of like that. She would always bring everything back to herself, her stories about St. Olaf. She was always beside herself. And we find out in the show that, she was addicted to pain pills. So that might have something to do with it, or just her naivete, or she maybe, as Dorothy said, did much acid in the 60s. But so that was her thing. She had to be alerted that she needed to be present in the moment to relate to people and show them sympathy. Even though she worked as a grief counselor, right? She was terribly self-centered, probably as much as Blanche. But anyway, if you watch the show, you know what I'm talking about. But that's empathy. Empathy is put yourself in my shoes, not tell me your story of what happened to you that happened to me exactly so that I can comfort you when you're supposed to be comforting me. Empathy is emotionally understanding what others are going through. But sympathy is sometimes confused with empathy, right? Sometimes we think that we're relating with people when all we're doing is saying, oh, I'm sorry that happened. That's sympathy. Saying, oh, I'm sorry that happened. That's sympathy. Empathy is, gosh, I understand why this must be a hard time for you. I saw what happened and I get why you would be upset because this happened to me. But I'm here for you if you need me. Empathy requires us to see things from the point of view of another without feeling the need to have gone through what the person went through. So you don't even have to have that happen to you, whatever happened to the person that you're comforting. You just have to put yourself in their shoes. If something bad happens to a person's child and that person, I saw this story on one of those crime shows a couple years ago. A child was kidnapped by his karate teacher, and the father, it ultimately ended up with the man being arrested, and the father, hearing about this, goes to the airport where the man is being he had to be extradited, and goes to where the man was arriving, and he, on TV, shoots the man dead. The father of the child shoots the man dead. A lot of people were like, if I was him, I would have done the same thing. If I was in his shoes, somebody kidnapped my son and was, molesting him and grooming him and whatever, I would have done the same thing. I would have killed him too. Very few people were like, yeah, but he shouldn't have done it because, vigilantism it's anarchy and blah, 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 blah. Even the son in later years would write, I wish my dad had not have done that, because the dad ultimately was put on trial and he received probation and he had to do all this community service, et cetera, et cetera. So he potentially lost time with his son, who needed his father in that moment, because he wanted to get back at this guy. But a lot of people were on his side. And I have to tell you, if something like that happened to one of my kids, I would be enraged too. I mean, I'm a lawyer and I know there is law, there is order, but I mean, you really can't say what you would do unless it's happening to you, but you can relate to people. You can relate, you can understand why someone would be filled with that kind of rage and want to harm the person who harmed their child. But you don't even have to have gone through it to go, oh, I understand. I get it. I get why you would do that. I get why you felt like you needed to do that. I get why your family is angry right now. I understand. I completely understand. And I'm here for you if you need somebody to talk to. When we see others suffering, our tendency is to one-up them, of course. I went through something similar, is what we often say. Or, oh, that happened to me. Or if it's someone's, birthday, we go, oh, it's my birthday too. Ooh. Not, oh, happy birthday. I bet you're so happy. Your family must be so overjoyed that you're still alive. Some people go, oh, hey, it's my birthday too. And then, or have you seen the thing where there's someone getting married and at the reception, a man proposes to his girlfriend at the reception at someone else's wedding? It's like, nah, don't do that. Don't try to one-up me. This is my day, my celebration. It's not your day. It's not your celebration. We're here for me and my spouse. But there's somebody decided to hijack your event, as it were, for their own significant moment. Empathy is selfless. Even if you can relate, you do not allow your experience to replace the one for whom you feel empathy. Again, empathy is selfless. Even if you can relate, you don't allow your experience to replace the one for whom you feel empathy. In the Verywell Mind, an online article called What is Empathy?, the author notes that psychiatric science divides empathy, that is the ability to feel what others feel, into 3 categories. And I'm going to put a list of works cited in the description of the podcast, because I do cite to a few different online articles and I want people to be able to reference them. But I also want to make sure everybody gets their proper credit. I don't want people to be out here, oh, she stole from me. No, I'm going to mention where I got the information from. I'm going to mention the authors, and then I'm also going to put the works cited in the description of the podcast. So again, this is from the website Verywell Mind, and the online article is called What is Empathy? Empathy, there are 3 categories of empathy. Yeah, 3 different kinds. One is affective empathy. That's affective with an A. It involves the ability to understand another person's emotions and respond appropriately. Such emotional understanding may lead to someone feeling concerned for another person's well-being, or it may lead to feelings of personal distress, which is codependency really. But somatic empathy involves having a sort of physical reaction in response to what someone else is experiencing. People sometimes physically experience what another person is feeling. When you see someone else feeling embarrassed, for example, you might start to blush or have an upset stomach. That secondhand embarrassment that everybody always talks about, the cringe. Oh, I'm cringing. I'm so embarrassed for him. And this somatic empathy is something that people who claim to be empaths will say, well, I take on the emotions of people in the room. If someone is anxious, I get anxious. If someone is sad, I get sad. And so I don't want to be around a lot of people because I feel whatever they're feeling. And some of that is like, okay. But most of it is BS because you're codependent. You've been made to feel like everyone's feelings should matter. Like you have to give your empathy to everybody because who you are as a person depends on how these people feel about you, how these people are made to feel when they're around you. It's not because you're taking on their feelings. It's not because you have this empathy for them. It is because you feel like you have to give them your attention. That's codependency. You feel like you have to be there for them. You feel like you have to be engrossed in all of the conversations. You have to make sure everyone is comfortable, not just with you, but in the setting. And you don't have to do that. That's codependency again. But there are times I know when you feel that secondhand embarrassment for someone. But it's not, if you're feeling that way all the time, there's something else going on. There's something else going on. That's, in my mind, I'm thinking anxiety disorder, but I am not a doctor, so. And then there's cognitive empathy, which involves being able to understand another person's mental state and what they might be thinking in response to the situation. This is related to what psychologists refer to as theory mind, or thinking about what other people are thinking. Now, people who are in love, this is what we do. I wonder if he's thinking about me. I wonder if she's thinking about me. I wonder if he's feeling what I'm feeling right now. I wonder if we're on the same page. I wonder if it's copacetic. You feel like, or that, what's the word? Synergism. You're coming together and you're feeling what the other person is feeling, and you're using that feeling to make something good happen. You're trying to understand what people might be thinking. And it's kind of bogus because you shouldn't be sitting around thinking about what other people are thinking. You should be out there living your life. A lot of people can be held hostage by this cognitive empathy, afraid to move, afraid to make any kind of move because they're wondering what other people are going to think about them for it. Or they're wondering if someone is going to show up for them. They're wondering if people are thinking about them. They're wondering if people are going to call them because you're feeling the same thing. You're thinking the same thing. You're on the same wavelength. You're sitting around. You're waiting for people to say how they feel so you can confirm that you're feeling the same way. You're kind of having yourself being held hostage by this, and it's all in your head. It's all in your head. And again, a little bit of codependency, because go live your own life. Who the fuck cares what other people are thinking? But at the same time, you don't want to be a jerk. You want to consider other people's feelings and whatnot, and be sensitive to people's needs and everything. So you do that. You consider it. You're considerate. When someone says, "Oh, that's so considerate of you," that's kind of the cognitive empathy. "Oh, thank you for thinking of me. This is exactly what I wanted on my birthday." Or, "Thank you for thinking of me. This is exactly what I needed at this time. My so-and-so passed away. This is exactly what I needed. I needed a spa day after I had a baby." Or, "This is exactly, you're thinking what I'm thinking. You really read my mind." A lot of, read my mind type of moments. And so you're considerate. That's cognitive empathy. But even in all of these, we understand that empathy is a present emotion. It's an active emotion. You have to do something, say something, go somewhere, talk to people. You have to talk to people to develop empathy. You have to talk to people to employ empathy. It provides for you a connection to the person you feel for. Whereas sympathy and compassion requires less understanding of how a person feels, though compassion is in action also. That's how you put your empathy to work for you. You do something for somebody. You help somebody with something. Sympathy is really kind of inactive. It's, a greeting card. It's something you put on a greeting card. You're not going to put "I empathize with you" on a greeting card. Although, maybe they're out there. Maybe they exist. I've never seen one. I've seen the sympathy section. I've never seen the empathy section. I've never seen that. I've never seen that. Sympathy is kind of like the greeting card feeling. You could say, "I sympathize with your, text somebody or post it on the internet. I feel so sorry that this happened to you." And that's it, and be done with it. So again, last week I talked about how narcissists are unable to feel empathy. Therefore, they can be dangerous, maniacal, and violent because they don't have to care about what other people think of them. It doesn't matter to them. You could think that they are the most ugliest, stupidest, dumbest, dangerous people. They don't care. They'll walk around with their nose in the air. It doesn't matter to them because they have all of these people working for them, working under them, doing all the hard work for them, propping them up or whatever, clapping for them. I saw on Twitter today, Donald Trump gave a speech to GOP at a GOP fundraiser, and he was praising Kim Jong-un. And it's like, dude, really? Really? See, narcissists don't even have to they have people. First of all, they have other narcissists who will prop them up, but they have people. They don't have to feel sorry for what they do because people will praise them. People will comfort them, will provide sympathy and empathy for them. They don't need it. They don't need to give it. They don't know how to give it. So you could say that you praise a brutal, ruthless dictator because that makes sense to you. You either are one or you were made to feel like this person has to matter to you. This person is important to you. So you're throwing your empathy at them. Empathy separates us, though. It separates us from the bad people. Although some bad people can show empathy, but really the monsters, the maniacs, the vicious killers, empathy separates us from them. And when I say us, I mean, the good people. I consider myself to be a good person. Alhamdulillah, mashallah. I employ empathy in my interactions with people. And this happened to me on Friday. I was at the thrift store, one of my favorite places. And a woman was in the store and she was complaining that she needed a refund because she had spent too much, or they had taken too much money off of her card, and she didn't have any money to get home. And at this thrift store, they give you a store credit if you want to do a return. They don't give you your money back. They don't put the money back on your card. And so she's complaining and complaining that she needs this. She's got to get home. And the security guard goes, I'll give you the money. How much money do you need? I'll give you the money. And for whatever reason, she wouldn't take it. And so she's outside. She goes outside and she's out there with all of her stuff. And I come out of the store and she goes, "Excuse me, miss." And I said, "Yes." And she goes into her whole spiel about needing the money to get home. And then she asked me to give her a ride home. And this is where the empathy comes in. I could feel for her because I've been in desperate situations where I wanted somebody to help me, where I needed assistance. And not everyone could give it to me. Like, you don't have to give anybody anything. But because you're, sensitive to people's needs and you can relate to them, you want to help them. But me, I'm not going to give a stranger a ride home. I'm just not going to do it. Not in the area I was in, not a person who's standing outside smoking a cigarette. And I said, no, I can't give you a ride home. And as I was walking away, she goes, "People in Cleveland are such assholes." Yeah, she called me an asshole. Because I wouldn't give her, a stranger to me, a ride home. And I didn't turn around and say anything to her. I just walked myself to my car and then I drove myself home. I didn't say anything. I didn't even want to say anything because it wasn't going to help her at all for me to go, "You know what, you raggedy so-and-so." It wasn't going to help her. It probably would have meant I was going back and forth with somebody who doesn't matter to me, which I don't want to do that either. Not going to waste my time on her. So I drove home, and whatever happened to her, and that's the end of it. But you don't have to give your empathy to everybody. You don't have to go around, seeking somebody to help. People will find you, of course. There are plenty of scammers online. Scammers who'll call you on your phone, who'll trick you into giving them your social security number, your PIN number to the ATM. They'll trick you into sending them money through gift cards. Lots of people will find you. And because you are who you are, you can relate to, and they'll tell you whatever story like, "Oh, this is your grandson. I'm calling from jail and I need money. Please help me." Or the calls that I get all the time are there's a federal agent who's intercepted a package from Buenos Aires or something, and your social security account has been locked. You need to call this number and have it unlocked. First of all, they will never call you on the phone. Rarely, if ever, they will not call you on the phone. Feds will show up at your house. They already know where you live. They already know where you're at. They have a warrant. They show up at your house. They don't call you on the phone. For what? So you can lie? So you can make up a story? They've already investigated. They've been watching you. They know you. They know who you are. They're coming to your house and they're going to come in full force. SWAT team, guns pulled out, everything. And that's it. They're not going to call you on the phone, and nobody's going to call you and tell you that there's no social security account to lock. But that's just me knowing stuff. But I'm telling you, if somebody calls you on the phone and says that, first of all, don't answer the phone. Second of all, if they leave a voicemail, delete it, because they will leave a voicemail. Delete it. Don't be bothered. They're scamming you. You have a good heart, but also use your head. Now, yourdictionary.com, ding, another reference, yourdictionary.com lists powerful examples of empathy statements. Now, if you want examples of what people say when they're being empathetic, here's your chance. Jot them down, write them down, practice them, feel them. Burn them into your brain. I've given you examples of what people do when they're empathetic. Now, here's what people say when they're being empathetic. And in these statements, you can tell the difference between empathy and sympathy, and empathy and toxic narcissism. So, the statement, I can see why you would be concerned or upset. I can understand why this must be so difficult for you. I see where you did everything you could. I'm here for you in this difficult time. Or, I hear what you're saying. I know how you must feel. If I were in your position, I'd be upset too. Or, you must feel like no one is listening. That's one that people, can relate to a lot. People feel unheard in certain situations, in work settings, in relationships, even parents and children. Children feel unheard. And so a parent can sit down and say to the kid, you must feel like no one is listening to you, but I'm here and I'm listening. And sometimes I tell people this all the time. Sometimes people just want to be heard. They don't want advice. They don't want to hear your story of how this happened to you too. They don't even want to hear, oh, chin up. It'll be okay. You'll get over it. You'll be better. And the worst, I tell you, the worst thing, and I have heard this so many freaking times, is this too shall pass. Well, no fucking duh. That one pisses me off to no end. I remember sitting in my psychiatrist's office. He is no longer my psychiatrist because he just was an insensitive prick and I couldn't do it anymore. But it was the beginning of the pandemic, and I was at home and my kids were at home, and there was just stress being thrown everywhere. And I was breaking down, because when you have, a mental illness, stress tends to exacerbate your symptoms. And so that's what it did for me. I was out of sorts, and I'm sitting in this man's office and I'm crying and I'm like, there's something wrong. There's something wrong. And all he could do was go, oh, this too shall pass. Yeah. Oh, I know COVID isn't forever, but it is forever. I know the pandemic will be over. I know that. But right now I'm telling you I need help. And you're telling me that there's really nothing wrong with me, which is something he would often say to me, is that, Ayana, you just have the problems of a modern woman. I could have wrung his neck, to be quite honest, because he was very dismissive all the time, because, I'm a lawyer and I have a career and I have a house in whatever city I live in. And, I have all these things. And he would always say, Ayana, I see people every day who are psychotic, who are in the hospital, who can't take care of themselves. And look at you. That's not you. There's nothing wrong with you. You just have the problems of a modern woman. And my problems of a modern woman, I guess, is I have a career and I have kids and I am a single parent and etc. But when someone comes to you and says, there's something wrong with me, you're either going to help them or you're going to listen and help. There are some people who immediately just need help. And then there are people who just want to be heard first, and then you figure out what to do. Rarely do people want to hear this too shall pass, because we know it is not forever. When you're suffering, it feels like it's going to be forever. Even though somewhere in your head, you know that this is going to be over, that there's going to be an end, but you don't need to hear that in that moment. You just either want people to listen, or you want somebody to go, I understand why you feel the way that you feel. And I'm here for you. I'm here to listen. If you want to talk, I'll listen. If you want to go and have some ice cream, we can go get ice cream. We can go to the mall and walk around. We don't have to talk about whatever happened at all. They don't want to hear, oh, you know what? You'll find another job. Or worse than that, you should have seen this coming. I mean, the red flags were everywhere. You should have seen this coming. You should have seen that your wedding was going to be canceled. You knew what kind of person he was. You knew who she was. You knew she was cheating on you. You should have seen it coming. This is what you get. While they're putting their arm around you. Like, don't do that to people. Do not do that to people. Don't tell them that they should have seen something coming. Because there are people who will see a train coming and still step in front of the train because that is how they feel. They feel like they want to step in front of a train, and so they'll do it. So you telling somebody that they should have seen this coming does not help. And you want to be a help. You want to be a help to people. You don't want to be a roadblock, and you don't want to be a hurt. You want to be a help to people. So when you say something like, oh, you'll find another one. You knew this was going to happen. You saw the signs. Instead of employing empathy and trying to understand how the other person is feeling and relating to their situation and encouraging them and moving on, or even helping them to move on, you're saying this crap. Don't do that to people. For some of us, though, in order to empathize with a person, we have to feel connected to them. A neighbor, a friend, a family member, a spouse, girlfriend, boy, we have to have some connection. A close coworker, somebody we went to school with, we have to feel a connection in order to employ empathy. But those factors, while they make it easier to empathize with a person, it can be a reason why we withhold empathy from others. But it can also be a reason why some people receive better treatment than others. You know, the deeper connections that people have with someone sometimes means that we receive better treatment from doctors, judges in a courtroom, dentists, the plumber who comes to your house, the mechanic. They'll give you $300 off because you went in there crying and sobbing. Well, they'll charge the other person $600 more than they needed to pay because that person doesn't mean anything to them. That person doesn't look like them, isn't from their neighborhood. You know, he's a white mechanic and it's a black guy coming into the shop. Oh, these black guys, you know, the biases kick in. And so people want to take advantage of you. Or you're in a court of law, and this happens a lot to people. When you're indigent, you have to have a public defender, or even worse, you're representing yourself. The judge isn't going to treat you as well as you should be treated. And as well as you should be treated is how they treat everybody else. People with money get treated better in the court system. Proven, 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 proven. You can argue with me until the cows come home about this because it is proven. People of a certain race, the white race, are treated better in the court system than blacks are, than Hispanic people are, than Native Americans are, than immigrants are. Proven, 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 scientifically, sociological studies. We talked about this in law school. It happens. Because people have those biases. The first bias, the obvious bias, is against the poor. I mean, the hatred of poor people, impoverished people, people living below the poverty line, at the poverty line. It's ridiculous. Ridiculous. And why? Because certain people will look at the poor and go, oh, they're social siphons. They're economic siphons. All they do is take. They don't work. They don't want to work. They don't want to do anything. They don't see these people as distressed and in need. And yeah, sure, some people take advantage of the system. But there are larger systems, other systems, that wealthy people take advantage of. The tax code is one of those systems that wealthy people take full advantage of the fact that they are not taxed enough. And they'll find tax havens, offshore places. Offshore. I always hate that phrase, offshore. We know exactly where the shores are, okay? they're hiding assets. They're doing this, doing that, so the government can't find their money. They're cheating on their taxes. But it doesn't look like that because, they have charitable deductions for every billion they make. They give away 2 billion to different charities, or they put their money overseas where it can't be touched, can't be reached. They know how to cheat the system. But it's okay for them to cheat the system. But a poor person who is maybe receiving $50 too much in food stamps is a siphon. Is someone to throw contempt at instead of someone you want to help. So there are biases that go into using empathy, and it's one of the reasons why things can be unfair in this democratic society where everyone is free. It can be unfair because if you're not the right complexion, if you're not in the right income bracket, if you're not from the right side of town, you're not going to get treated as well as people who are from the, quote, right side of town. People who have the complexion for the protection, as they say, you're not going to get treated as well as some others. Even for, in the healthcare administration, in hospitals, doctors' offices, Black women, and I'm going to talk about this later, like in a couple of weeks, I'm going to do a podcast on this about the treatment of Black pregnant women and how Black pregnant women have a higher mortality rate than any other race. And it is not even close. It's so glaringly high that it's studied, that it's looked at. It's so glaringly high that it's an epidemic. It's so glaringly high that Black women who are pregnant now, who have the means to do so, are dictating their entire birth plan. And they're having doulas, and they're having this, and they're insisting on the treatment that they should receive because they don't want to die while they're pregnant. They don't want to die while they're giving birth. They don't want to die after they give birth because they know that their concerns aren't taken seriously. They aren't listened to because for some reason, Black people do not receive the same well treatment that white people do when they're in medical crises or when they're going to see their doctor, their family physician or a specialist. Diseases go undiagnosed. Pain complaints are dismissed. Symptoms are dismissed as, it's because you're pregnant, or it's because you're fat, or it's because you're old. They're dismissed. And God forbid you're Black and poor, because it's going to be even worse for you, because you're not going to have the money to see the specialists. You're not going to have the money for the physical therapy. You're not going to have the money for the oncologist. So you're probably going to die alone. And if you're pregnant, you're going to be alone, and it's going to feel terrible and awful. And I'm going to talk about that later, because that deserves its own full-length conversation. But back to this conversation about empathy. But you see, those are the examples, the stark examples of how withholding empathy can lead to drastic results, dangerous results. And another big example of that is the war that we're witnessing right now between, well, I won't even say between. Russia is the aggressor, and the Ukraine is trying to maintain its independence from Russia. It's trying to be an independent country, remain independent. And here's this aggressor who Russia wasn't, it was the USSR. And last week I did a pitiful example. After I got off the podcast, I was like, these people are going to listen to this and be like, that girl is stupid as hell. I did just a quick and dirty explanation of the Cold War, USSR, the Soviet Union. There were all these countries, and there were wars over the years, not the Vietnam War and in Afghanistan, and all these things happened. And eventually the SSR broke up into all these different countries. And the Ukraine was one of those countries. For some reason, Putin has decided that he wants all of this back. He wants that Soviet Union back. He wants it back. And so he's already taken over. I mentioned Chechnya last week. He's already, there's another, I can't remember the name of it, and I want to get it right. I think it was Kyrgyzstan. And I don't want to be disrespectful and say one of the Stan countries, but it was Kyrgyzstan, or it wasn't Kazakhstan, but it was Kyrgyzstan. And I know Chechnya was another one. And he's trying to go after all of the land he can get back. All of the bordering countries. Oh, you used to belong to us, so now we want you back, and you're going to come back. And these people are like, no. And unfortunately, some weren't able to withstand him and were taken over by him. But there were others who were able to get out, and the Ukraine is really holding its own. I got to give it to these people. They're really holding their own, even though Putin is destroying them and just, he's going to bomb them into submission, I guess. But using empathy and navigating international conflicts is a thing. Yeah. Did you know that you could empathize with your adversaries? That's a conflict resolution tool? That's a tool to help you get to the yes that you want from these people? If you're in a fight with someone, an ongoing conflict. But what happens when people we're asked to empathize with are creeps? There's that. What happens when we're asked to give people the benefit of the doubt and it puts us at a disadvantage? Like, there are people who are very much saying, we support Putin. This is Russia is a Christian nation and we have to throw our support to him. First of all, the Ukraine is a Christian nation. So you can dispense with that BS. There are, of course, Jewish people, Muslims. There are Buddhists in the Ukraine, but that is a Christian nation. So if you want to throw your support somewhere, here's the big Christian terrorizing the little Christian. What would Jesus do? Okay. But there are people, places, things who they withhold empathy. Even when they should be employing it, they withhold it, and it's detrimental. For instance, historically, the international community has acted too late to prevent widespread violence and genocide and wars. They withheld their empathy. They didn't want to get involved. They don't want to be involved in international conflicts. Last week I talked about the acceptable amount of violence. And it wasn't just that. It was here, like in places like Rwanda, the former Yugoslavia, Rohingya, Bosnia, Kosovo, all of these examples where the international community acted too late and millions of people were killed. Millions. Bosnia and Serbia. Remember that war? Who wanted to get involved? Nobody. Nobody wanted to get involved because it was seen as regional conflicts. Even Rwanda was seen as a regional conflict. And by the time the international community got involved, there were skulls lined up. Millions of people were dead. Millions. And when the international community finally got involved in the breaking up of the former Yugoslavia, they had to form an entire international war crimes tribunal because of the atrocities. And the same happened for Rwanda. There were international criminal tribunals. There were people hunting down war criminals. There were trials. There were, that's how bad it was. But when you think about what if they had gotten involved earlier, would any of this have happened? Maybe not. Probably not. I mean, some things were bound to happen. Like Yugoslavia was obviously going to break up. There wasn't anything anybody could do, but probably it would have been easier. It would have gone easier. It would have been better if there were international bodies like the United States who were involved. But you could ask people in the United States, Yugoslavia, where is that? Where the heck is that? They had no idea what was going on. They didn't know. So it may not have prevented what eventually happened, the war that happened and the breaking up, but it might have prevented the rapes. Rapes used as war crimes. No, rapes used as tools of war. Would have prevented the genocide. It would have prevented millions of deaths. Maybe if the international bodies had gotten involved in Rwanda between the two parties that were fighting, maybe they could have come to a peaceful resolution. Maybe it would have been a few hundred. Maybe it would have been a few dozen. But see, you don't want to get in, and you don't want to be the international body that's constantly getting involved in everything. Like people say the United States, oh, we spread ourselves too thin. We shouldn't be here. We shouldn't be there. We shouldn't be doing this. What about the homeless and the veterans and all that? We have our problems here. And that's what's happening in the Ukraine. People here, people who are relating to this very well, who feel so sorry for what's happening. They see what's happening and they're demanding a no-fly zone over the Ukraine, which means nothing in or out, nothing flying over, no planes in, no planes out. You see a plane, shoot it down. See a plane, shoot it down. That's it. But that would require the NATO-led nations, such as the United States, to get involved in a war that has nothing to do with us. And the Ukraine is not in NATO. They have been trying to get into NATO, which is one reason why Putin wants to take over. He doesn't want them in NATO, because if they have the power of NATO behind them, then it's going to be the essentially the modern developed world that's going to be at war anytime Putin moves into a NATO-led country. That's World War III right there. But because the Ukraine isn't in NATO, the NATO nations, they don't want to do a no-fly zone. They just want to give them money. Here, we'll give you money and arms. We'll give you arms. Here's some arms. Guns. You want guns? You want tanks and bombs? Here you go. Here you go. Take your army and the men who have stayed behind and teach them how to fight, make them use all of these arms. And this is what they're faced with. Now, in the United States, it's a democratic country. If people don't want war, there won't be war. If people want war, such as after 9/11, there will be war. And there will be trillions of dollars pumped into that war. Right now in the United States, there is not enough support for no-fly zones. Even though Russia is really brutalizing the Ukraine at this point. They're not stopping. Putin is not stopping. He's not surrendering. He's not going to surrender. He's not going to pull out. Something's going to have to give. Somebody's going to have to act to stop him. And however that needs to happen. In their writing, lesson number 1, empathize with your enemy. Ding, another citation. Lesson number 1, empathize with your enemy. Authors James G. Blight and Janet M. Lang discuss empathy among adversaries and the importance of empathy in conflict resolution. They state, lacking empathy, policymakers make decisions based on fantasy rather than on fact. Lacking empathy, misperception, misunderstanding, and misjudgment run rampant. Lacking empathy,
Leaders who brought the world to the brink of nuclear war over missiles in Cuba and escalated small-scale civil war in Southeast Asia to regional catastrophe. Korea, Vietnam, Cuban Missile Crisis. Lacking empathy, leaders brought the world to the brink of nuclear war over missiles in Cuba and escalated small-scale civil war in Southeast Asia to regional catastrophe. They didn't employ empathy, so misperception, misunderstanding, and misjudgment ran rampant. Blight and Lang discussed the book Wilson's Ghost in the post 9/11 world. So Blight and Lang in their paper talked about this particular book written by Robert S. McNamara, where it stated, the West, led by the United States, must seek by all possible means to increase its understanding of history, culture, religion, motives, and attitudes of those who have declared themselves to be its adversaries. And so this is referencing 9/11, when the U.S. invaded Iraq and then went into Afghanistan without any sensitivity to the people. You know, everyone was just some kind of sand piece of shit or a goat farmer or whatever. These people weren't to be respected. They weren't to be understood. They weren't to be shown any kind of compassion or sensitivity or anything, even the kids. They're your enemy. You don't need to be nice to them. You don't need to understand them. And what always struck me is that the United States was at war in 2 Muslim countries, but back home, American people largely had no idea what Muslims, what we do, what we celebrate, what our traditions are, the language that Muslims speak, the main language, I'll say, the language of the Quran, Arabic. We have Ramadan, we have Eid, people have no idea. Muslim women are covering, we're wearing our khimar, we're observing hijab. Nobody has any idea what we're talking about. It's so foreign to them. And I would always be shouting, how can you be in 2 Muslim countries, fighting wars, killing leaders, just bombing the hell out of these places, and you don't know anything about these people? This is why Afghanistan went on for as long as it did. This is why the Taliban was able to take over so easily. You don't know anything about these people. You don't know who they're loyal to. You don't know about their religion. Here in the United States, they'll use Muslims or people posing as Muslims. They'll use Muslims to infiltrate masjids. That's how little they know about us. They know that we'll just accept anybody, but they don't know us well enough. So they use other Muslims to bring us down. And it's sad. It's sad and it's disturbing. It's very disturbing. But when you don't know anything about your enemy, how hard is it going to be to win them over? Extremely hard. Extremely hard. And this is in anything. In the boardroom, when you're trying to do a merger, when you want to take over a company, what do you know about the culture of the people who work there? Nothing. What do you know about the CEO? What do you know about the boss? The people who work below him? What do you know about these people? Nothing. How are you going to take them over if you don't know anything about them? How are you going to get the people who already work at this place you want to take over to easily assimilate into your company, to merge into your company? You don't know anything about how they operate, what their work environment is like. You don't know these people's names. You don't know where they live. And we see this in policing, too, in the United States. Law enforcement officers don't live, majority, especially if they're in a big city, they don't live in the city that they're policing. They don't live in the communities that they're policing. So when they're driving around and doing patrols, people are giving them the business, giving them a hard time, because these aren't people that they see every day. They're not seeing Sergeant so-and-so outside mowing his lawn. He lives 50 miles away in another community where they don't have these kinds of problems that the police have to show up for all the time. The police don't want to live where they have to police. And that's not the case everywhere. I know for the city of Cleveland, for the longest time, public employees, firefighters, police had to live in the city of Cleveland to work for the city of Cleveland. And that changed. Suddenly they didn't have to do that anymore. Now they're all living out, far away. If you live in Cleveland, you know they're policing in Cleveland, they're living in Westlake. They're policing in Cleveland and they're living in Beechwood. They're policing in Cleveland, and I'm talking about like Kinsman, Cleveland, like Central Cleveland. And they're living probably out in Strongsville. They don't need to know anything about this place. All they know is that they have a job to do. And when someone calls 911 and says they need police, they show up. But this is one of the problems. They don't have the empathy because they don't know these people. They don't know the people they're who are in the community that they're policing. They don't know the culture. They don't know the problems these people face every day. They don't know what the children are going through. They don't know what it's like inside of the schools, except for when there's a fight and the police have to show up. That's what they know about the schools. It's not like, who are the people in your neighborhood? And there's the teacher. Oh, teacher, hi. No, the teachers. And this is what, when I was a kid, I was always amazed. My teachers, like I had white teachers when I was in elementary school. And I thought they lived where I lived. You know, I'm a little kid. What the hell do I know? I thought they lived where I live. And then I would find out later, no, they live in Mentor. I'm in East Cleveland. They're in Mentor. I'm in East Cleveland. They're out in freaking Avon. I'm in East Cleveland. They're living in Orange Village. They only have to see East Cleveland when they come to work. And then they get to leave and don't have to think about it until the next day. They don't understand the parents. They don't understand what's going on in the homes because they don't live around the people whose children are in these schools. They don't see that their community is a food desert. There's no grocery store. They don't see that there's violence. They don't have, unless it's on the news. That's where they found out what was happening to the kids in their community, is when they watched the news. Have you all heard of something called the Oppression Olympics? It's a phrase used by funny people on the internet. When I first heard that, I was like, oh my gosh, that makes sense. The Oppression Olympics, where people compete to be the most put upon, woeful, sorrowful victims, the one-up-yas. Oh, I know you're a refugee and you're in war, but I'm also a refugee in war and I'm from the Ukraine, so I'm more deserving. And that is exactly what is happening right now. It's pretty sad. It's pretty sad that even in times of war, even during all of this ugliness, we're seeing that there's a preference, that there's a bias against certain or for certain refugees. And I've seen this a lot in posts on the internet, and I've read stories about it and watched videos, and it's like, it's unbelievable the way reporters talk about Ukrainian refugees as if they're somehow more desirable to the countries where they're fleeing to because they're white, middle class, working class, even wealthy. Yeah, those people will have an easier time in Poland. I mean, okay, but they also don't speak Polish. So how easy is it going to be for them? They don't speak the language. And isn't that what people always complain about refugees? Oh, you especially here, you don't speak English. English isn't even the official language of the country, by the way. But if you don't speak English, people make fun of you. You could have as much money as you want, but people are still going to look at you like you're dumb because you don't know how to say the word toothbrush in English. So the reporters, the way they talk about the refugees, and they bring up Middle Eastern refugees, of course. And we've also seen the stories of African and Indian students who are in the Ukraine, some of them in medical school, unbelievably being rejected at the border to Poland and Romania and Hungary. Even the Hungarian president saying, well, you know, these people, they don't look like us. The Ukrainians, they look like us. It'll be easier for them because they'll have an easier time assimilating because they're not from, you know, one of those stand countries. They're not Syrian. They're not Arab. They're not, you know, Syrians or Arabs, excuse me. They're not from Afghanistan. They're not Kurds. They're not whatever other group of people, whatever other group of desert dwelling people they can think of. They're not Palestinian. Arabs as a whole are undesirable refugees, even though Arabs as a whole do not make up the highest amount of refugees in the world. Right now, it's the Ukrainians. Right now, it is the Ukrainians. But there was a time when it was Jewish people fleeing Europe because Adolf Hitler was coming. And it was the United States saying, no, we're not taking any more of you. We have enough of your kind. It's like you're at a modeling agency and you go in and you think that you're hot stuff, and the casting agent says, no, we have enough of your type here. And you're sent home. It was the same way during World War II. When Hitler was like advancing across Europe. And the United States was hearing things, but whatever. And it has nothing to do with us. It's regional. It has nothing to do with us. And they weren't letting Jewish people in. And they were having to go elsewhere, or they were having to go back and hide and have people hide them and hope that they weren't found. And still over 1 million of them were found and killed. And others, Catholics and Jehovah's Witnesses and Sufis. And then Mussolini advanced across northern Africa and put Libyans in internment camps. But those people weren't welcome, because at home in the United States, there were already biases against every group of immigrants. Chinese, Irish, Italian. Probably the only people who didn't have it hard were the English, for obvious reasons. Black people had it hard, again, for obvious reasons. Jewish people had it hard. Even still to this day, there's the prejudice and the bigotry that was present in those years, in the 20s, the 30s, the 40s. It's seeped into today's society. It hasn't gone away. It's just been masked. But that is what's happening to refugees from Somalia, Ethiopia, from refugees from Syria, from Afghanistan. All the people, when the U.S. pulled out of Afghanistan and they were taking people from Afghanistan on the planes, helping them evacuate, there were some people who were, holding on to the planes, and they were falling off and they were dying trying to get on these planes. The United States is bringing these people to the U.S. There were people saying, well, where are they going to live? What are they going to do when they get here? Make sure they're not criminals. Right, because we don't want any criminals in the United States. because we don't already have high crime rates in most major U.S. cities, right? We don't need any more criminals, you're right. But what's funny, what happens when people come as refugees or through asylum, if they're, a dentist or a doctor, they can't just be a dentist in the United States. They can't just be a doctor. They can't just be a lawyer in the United States. Yeah, they have to go back to school. So if you're a doctor in Syria, or you're a doctor who comes from Vietnam, you got to go back to school in the United States, and you're going to work at a gas station while you're doing it, probably. So imagine you're making all the money in Syria, but because some jackoff dictator bombed the hospital, bombed your house, bombed you out of your house, you had to flee. Even though you're a doctor, when you come to the United States, you're not. You're not a person who can practice medicine. You have to make sure you know the American medical rules. Even though the human body is the same all over the world, 2 eyes, 2 ears, 2 hands, 2 legs. The American medical rules, you got to know what those are, because they might not be the same in that savage country that you come from. But again, in the Ukraine, this is what's happening to African immigrants or students who are in the country. They're being given the cold shoulder because they don't hold passports for the Ukraine. They don't even hold passports for the United States. See, here it is. If you're black and you hold a passport for the United States, you're getting out of the Ukraine. I read a story about a basketball player who's playing basketball in the Ukraine, black guy. And another guy who's on some show, Dancing with the Stars. He's Ukrainian. He has a Ukrainian passport, but he also has a U.S. passport. They were both able to get out. Took them a while, but they were able to get out. So if you hold a U.S. passport, you're gravy. But if you hold a Ukrainian passport and you're trying to get into Poland or Hungary or Romania, you're fine. As long as you're not, a young man trying to get in. But then again, they'll tell the African male students or the Indians, they'll tell them, no, you have to stay and fight for the Ukraine. They're not Ukrainian. They're students, engineering, medical school. They want to be doctors. They didn't come to the Ukraine to fight for the Ukraine. If they're going to fight, they're going to go back home and do it. They're not going to do it for the Ukraine. And they're sure as hell not going to do it now that they've seen what the Ukrainians think about them. And I'm not saying all Ukrainians, and I'm not generalizing. What I'm saying is what I've seen. I've seen these people at the train station, watching the trains go, leave them, women, children. They can't get on the train because they're not Ukrainian citizens. The border is closed to them because they're not Ukrainian. What's even worse, though, or as equally as bad, is that their own countries weren't stepping in to help them. I read a presser from the Nigerian consulate, and it said, stay until you can find a way out. Not, we're sending someone to come and get you. During the height of the beginning of the COVID pandemic, where everything was shutting down, there were students from Africa in China in school. China told them they had to leave. Their countries paid for them to come home, quarantined them, or they made arrangements for the people to stay there, and they paid for them to stay there. They provided them with money. Some didn't. Some were just like, fuck it, you're on your own. But for the most part, they were taken care of. So there's failure all around here for these African and Indian refugees. Although I think I remember hearing that India was able to get some people out. I'm not sure. Please fact check me. I love it when people fact check me. But these people are desperate. They want to get out. They want to go home. They're not fighting for a nation that isn't theirs. They're not fighting, period, because they're not trained as soldiers. And they're being told, no, sorry, there's nothing we can do for you. Same thing happened with Syrians, actually. Syrians who were trying to get into European countries, they were fleeing war. I remember one video it was just women, men, children running across the border, babies. And I can't remember where this was, but it's the video of a reporter tripping one of the people so the police could stop them from fleeing over the border. The reporter who was reporting about the crisis tripped a person so that the police could retrieve them and take them back, keep them from going over the border. People were running. They were running for their lives. But if you're in Europe, in the European Union, well, there's an agreement among the nations that they have to take a certain number of refugees. And believe me, they do not like, the people don't like it. The leaders don't like it either. That's why Brexit, the refugee crisis, creating refugees that people don't like, is the reason for Brexit. Right there, period. Bias, bigotry, racism. They don't want to be told by the European Union that you have to take a certain number of immigrants. They don't want to be told by the European Union that you have to do anything. They already weren't using the currency in Great Britain. But they also didn't want to be beholden to the laws, particularly the laws about accepting refugees. And the media campaigns were ridiculous. And this is why Boris Johnson is the prime minister, because he promised a crackdown on it. We're going to close the borders. Can you imagine? And then people, when they woke up and realized that this is what's happening and that Boris Johnson, to them, a lot of them, is a buffoon. He's their Donald Trump. He's tripping all over himself all the time. And people realized, they were like, oh, so Brexit means that we're not in the European Union anymore? That now we have to show our passports when we want to go to France or Germany or Switzerland or Sweden? We have to show our passports? Yeah, you got to show your passport when you want to go to Germany. When you're on the train that goes from France, that goes from Britain to France, Great Britain to France, you got to show your passport. You got to go through customs. Oh, yeah. Life is very hard for them. Very. On the one hand, they were lied to, and on the other hand, they wanted to believe the lies. So there's that. And on the other hand, people don't read the fine print. They don't pay attention to what they're doing. They're just being led in one direction. And they don't understand the full weight of their decision, of their choice, but they're acting on their biases. They're acting on their prejudices. And they see a problem on TV all the time. Oh, the refugee crisis is a crisis. They're taking all your jobs and they're coming and they don't speak the language and they're not going to blend in. And where are we going to put all these people? And there's no houses already. And gas prices are high and food prices are little. And they're believing it. So what do? They take their empathy and they're like, no, sorry. I feel sorry for what you're going through, but you're not coming here. You're not coming here. You're not taking my job. So, in a lot of cases, we need to employ empathy. A lot of cases, we need to let go of our bigotry, our biases, and just listen to people, hear people, understand people. And not enough of that is happening. And I read an article in the New York Times, and it's called How to Be More Empathetic. And what it emphasized is that because people live in their own bubbles, their neighborhood bubble, their religious bubble, even at work, you work in a bubble, you tend to start thinking and acting like the people in that group. You guys become homogenous. Dress the same, talk the same, think the same, act the same. And so when someone from outside of that bubble is appealing to your good grace your consideration is appealing to you for help, you're like, no. Sorry. Sorry, you Muslim. Sorry, you Jew. Sorry, you Arab. I feel very sorry for you. I hope, God makes it better for you. I'll be praying for you. I'll be praying for you. There's another one people use when they're just like, I don't give a fuck and I don't want to be bothered. I'll be praying for you. Prayer without action is what? Useless. Even God tells you that. You got to act. You got to do these things. For Muslims, we're commanded. We are commanded. That's how important it is to help people. We are commanded to help people. Zakat, paying the poor due. We are commanded to give a portion of our income, our yearly income, to the poor. We put money in boxes at the masjid. We give checks to the masjid. We give money to people. We find people in the community who need, whatever they need, and we give it to them because God has commanded us to pay the poor due. And what's funny is that God doesn't say what kind of poor you should give it to. Doesn't say believing poor or, Muslim poor. It doesn't say single mom poor, or it doesn't say don't give it to Jewish people. Don't give it to Christians. Don't give it to atheists. It says pay the poor due. If there are poor people in your community and you're in a position to help them. You are commanded to help them. Period. There's no, but I want to save my money for this certain da-da-da. I mean, it's fine. You want to keep your money in your community? Fine. But if you have money to spare and you know someone is in need, give it to them. Give it to them. What do you care if you have $1 less? Even with gas prices now being what they are, totally ridiculous. And you want to put some more money on your gas tank, and you see somebody who has no money for gas, and you know that they need to get somewhere, give it to them. What is it going to hurt you? $20, $30. If you're making $500 a day. If your take-home pay is $4,000 every 2 weeks, what is it going to hurt you to be without $30? It's not. It's not going to hurt you. But this article, How to Be More Empathetic, published in the New York Times, the author noted that we tend to live in a bubble, as I said. People around us have similar education, careers, family makeups, voting preferences, religious and political views, creating an empathy deficit. Okay, there's an empathy deficit. And we saw this a lot during the quarantine, where people were in their houses, like stuck, couldn't leave because they were sick, or they were, they had to wait the 14 days, or there was nowhere to go. Everything was shut down. So people tended to forget that there still was a world out there where people needed help. There were people who needed, they lost their job due to the quarantine, the shutdowns. They needed assistance. There were so many people who needed assistance. The federal government had to step in and pause rents, pause evictions, subsidize rent for people, provide more free health care for people, food, state governments providing food and tests for people, COVID tests. And in public schools, the kids were given free lunches. Even if they went to school at home, they were given free lunch, free breakfast, computers, internet. But something happened also where people forgot to use empathy in their interactions because we were so closed off from each other. We forgot to use empathy in our interactions with each other. And so there's an empathy deficit. As the author notes, homogenous societies leave us holding biases about the outside world. In order to change, we have to let go of our biases. Move beyond our bubbles, our worldview to understand those held by others. So we have to move beyond our bubble, our view of the world, to understand those held by others. Admit that you're biased. Check your privilege. Talk to people. Stand up for others. A good example of this, Black Lives Matter protests. When there were people who weren't Black marching with us, there were people who were sympathetic to law enforcement marching with us. There were people who this did not affect at all, wealthy people giving money. Oh, where can we put our money to show that we're diverse and we care about diversity? But you see this also with reproductive rights, women's rights. Men are involved. Women who don't want to have children, who can't have children, are involved. They're showing their support. They're taking a stand for someone when it doesn't involve them, when it doesn't affect them. They're taking a stand. The author of that article notes that we don't need to understand everything about someone to make them feel respected. And that is so true. You don't need to know my whole life story to believe that my life holds value. You don't need to have Black friends to understand why Black lives matter. You don't need to have daughters or a wife to understand why a woman shouldn't be raped because of what she's wearing, or at all. You don't have to be someone who knows a woman to sympathize with why women don't want to be sexually harassed when they're at work. They just want to work. And so we have to create laws to protect women from this behavior, to protect anybody from the behavior. But mostly these laws come because women were being harassed, sexually assaulted. These rape laws, these sexual harassment policies in the workplace, these labor laws, because of what was happening to women. But you don't have to be a woman. You don't, oh, well, I have daughters, so I understand. You don't have to have daughters to understand why women don't want to be harassed in the classroom. You just have to have a pulse. But you also have to have empathy. People are often looking for a reason to be involved, to understand. They need a connection. They need some reason. They can't just step out and help. They can't just stand up and help. They have to be able to relate. They have to have some connection. But you don't need to have a connection to a person or a situation to give it respect. To make a person feel respected. To make a person feel like they belong, like they're not an outcast. You advocate for things that will help others, even if it does not directly impact you. So in the case of the refugees in the Ukraine, you would push for acceptance of refugees, even if they don't look like you. Imagine that. These are just people fleeing war. And they're fleeing war. I know it's hard to imagine that in the United States, because when was the last time there was an actual war on our shores? Like every day, everything. That was the Civil War. I mean, you could say 9/11 was the beginning of but it was the World Trade Center came down, and then we went and we captured people and we invaded and we did. But a war like every day where people have to flee their homes, where people have to run and fight and take up arms on our shores, on our soil. It's the Civil War. We're so removed in the United States from the idea of war that people fleeing their country because they're being bombed out of our house, out of their homes, it doesn't make sense to us. We can't relate. And so when we see on the news that, you know, in the state of Ohio has agreed to accept 800 refugees, we're like, where the hell are they going to put all them people? Why are they coming here? Why can't they go to Canada? Or why can't they go to Mexico? Or whatever the hell ignorant BS people come up with. They're fleeing a bomb. an actual bomb. Try to understand, even if you can't relate, try to understand what that is like. 1 minute you're having dinner with your family, and the next you're in a car and you're on a plane and you're never seeing your home again. Another way you can learn or build up your empathy storage is to read. Yes, read. Reading is one of the reasons why I started this podcast, because people just are not reading. They're not analyzing information. They're not reading it. They're not reading what's posted. But reading allows you to open your mind to the experiences of others. Read literature from Black authors if you're white, from Hispanic authors if you're Black, for instance. Read stories about Jewish people. Read stories about Italian immigrants. Read something that has nothing to do with your lived experience. Nothing to do with your background. Raise empathetic kids. Oh yeah. Right now, if you had kids, right now is when they're learning empathy and you're teaching it to them. You are their first teacher. They're going to learn empathy from you. They're going to see you, observe you, how you are with people. They're going to learn that from you, and they're going to take it to their friends. They're going to take it to school. They're going to take it out into the world. They're going to grow up to be empathetic adults. Also, most importantly, a way to build up your empathy reserve: shut your mouth. Shut your fucking mouth. Learn to be quiet and listen to people. When someone is telling you something that they're going through, don't interject. Do not interject with your experience. Oh yeah, that's happened to me. There's a certain person that I know who, God bless her. But every time I would relate something that I was going through, or some experience that I would have, oh, I've been through that, she would say. Oh, I've been through that. That happened to me. That happened to me too. Oh yeah, that happened to me. That's no big deal. You'll be fine. Or, oh yeah, I take a pill for that too. Not even listening, not even paying attention. There were a lot of times where I just absolutely felt like I was not being heard at all. And so I stopped talking. When you don't feel like you're being heard, you stop talking. You stop sharing. You stop opening up to people. But this is something that people do when you're telling them what, say you got diagnosed with some new disorder. Like when I was diagnosed with hypothyroidism, and I would talk to people about it. People who had hypothyroidism. Oh yeah, I take this pill for it. Yeah. Yep. I just wanted to be heard because I had finally been able to put a name to what the heck was going on with me. But instead, all I got was, what's the strength of the medication you're taking? What medicine are you taking? Oh, well, I take 0.5 micrograms. Oh, well, I take 10. And I also take this one. And I'm like, oh, okay, fine, okay. So you have to shut up. You have to be quiet and listen to other people. You have to talk to other people. You have to put your phone down when you're outside. I know. I can't stand people either. You have to put down your phone and talk to people. I mean, don't just accost people. But if somebody says hi to you, say hi back. You're sitting on a train, long ride on the train. I know you don't want to talk to people on the subway. You don't want to talk to people on the bus. But would it kill you? Just have a conversation with somebody. Or just not have your, eyes on your phone. Correct your posture for once and have your head up, looking around at the people around you. You're going to see people from all walks of life. You might strike a conversation with one of them and learn something new about somebody. Imagine that. So put your phones down. Listen to people. Hear people. Get out of your bubble. Go to a new side of town. If you're in an office all day, go outside on your lunch break. Show curiosity in events outside of your community or house of worship. Woohoo! Imagine that. Imagine if you didn't interact with just your people, your Muslims or your Christians. Imagine if you interacted with people of other faiths and learned about them. It doesn't take away from what you believe. You believe as you believe. But you're trying to know the people who live in your community. We can all be resources for each other. We can help each other. Again, who are the people in your neighborhood? They're not all Christian. They're not all Muslim. Some of them they don't believe in God. Some of them work, don't work, have kids, don't have kids. Some of them are very interesting people. But you would have to get out of your bubble to find out. And I highly suggest that you get out of your bubble. And of course, listening to this podcast with this diverse host, this Black Muslim woman, single mama host of a podcast that I do from my dining room, is one way for you to break out of your bubble and learn something new. And build your empathy reserve. Let go of your biases. Let go of your prejudices. Listen to people. Hear people. You can develop empathy if you care to. But only if you care to. Good night. I'll see you guys next week. You'll hear me next week. I'll be working on next week's topic. I'm not sure what it's going to be yet. But I'll figure it out and I'll be back to explain it all to you next week. Have a good week, everyone. Goodbye.